start talking about this shady maneuver that could mess up the whole thing for Blake and potentially send her to jail?
Blake Lively just suffered a major legal blow. But was this dismissal part of a bigger plan to expose cracks in her case? The judge's shocking decision has opened up new questions about her evidence and tactics that Hollywood won't stop buzzing about. Here's what you need to know.
Legal maneuver that was called out back in April by a lot of people, but it never really was resolved. It's still not really sorted out. And the ramifications of this, I feel like, still aren't being discussed enough by the media because this could have massive ramifications. Now, let me attempt to sort of summarize where we are, and then I want to go to you and tell me if I'm wrong. But so basically in September, Blake, I'm going through my notes, Blake filed this John Doe lawsuit in New York under a shell entity called Van Zandt Inc., which had no defendant on it, used vague language. 4 days later after that, they issued a subpoena via this shell corporation to Jennifer Abel's former publicist, Stephanie Jones, and her PR firm Jones Work, seeking communications with It Ends With Us. The case and subpoena flew under the radar, didn't notify Jennifer Abel, didn't notify anybody. It was all just anonymous John Does. It triggered sharp criticism from Freedman, Justin's attorney, saying it was an abuse of process, that her counsel was using hidden corporate shields to evade transparency. Now, this is what yielded those text messages from Jennifer Abel and then got it into the New York Times. These, we can bury everybody. We can bury anyone. The plan to destroy Lively. These are the texts, are the crux of the retaliation campaign. But the question is, was that phone, were these texts legitimately obtained, right? And now it's under intense scrutiny now that a lot of people, sleuths of people, figured out it was subpoenaed via this John Doe anonymous lawsuit labeled to a corporation called Van Zandt. Is that a fair summary of where we are at this point up to now?
That's a pretty good summary, actually. Yeah, that's pretty good.
So why is this such a problem for Blake? Why was that so shady? I guess, can we start there? What is the legal issues with what Blake actually did there? Before we talk about the bigger ramifications, everything else, can you break that down a little more deeper?
Yeah, so to the extent when they shook her down and they cornered her in that office and they demanded her cell phone and they had these security guards there and they escorted her out the building and they have her stuff, they were entitled to have whatever business communications they had on that phone. What they were not entitled to do was go into her personal accounts, obtain cloud information, steal her personal communications, that tipped them off to the fact that Freedman was potentially gearing up for a civil extortion lawsuit against them and use it for future litigation against them. That is potentially illegally obtained. That could lead to breach of fiduciary duties. There a number of other crimes. We're a long way from her potentially going to jail. I'm not sure how you get to implicate Blake Lively into going to jail on the basis of those facts just yet. But to the extent that those personal communications were illegally obtained, and I think that they know that they were, because there's no other reason to file this sham lawsuit. What they're essentially doing is trying to take illegally obtained stuff and give it color of law. Basically,
the judge's dismissal of Jed Wallace from Blake Lively's case might seem minor on the surface, but the implications are turning heads in legal and Hollywood circles alike. Officially, the ruling was straightforward. Wallace, based in Texas, couldn't be held accountable under New York's jurisdiction for the claims tied to this lawsuit. That meant Lively's case against him was tossed out, at least for now. The dismissal was without prejudice, a technical term that gives her the right to refile in the appropriate venue. In other words, she hasn't entirely lost her shot to pursue Wallace. But if this was a win for Lively, why does it feel like she's losing ground? Here's the part that's raising eyebrows. Lively was allowed the unusual privilege of amending her complaint, a move that essentially gives her extra time to refine and, potentially, salvage her case. The judge limited this amendment to the claims already on file, signaling that the window to introduce anything new had slammed shut. That seemed generous, considering the same judge has been anything but lenient with Justin Baldoni, the defendant at the center of Lively's broader legal battle. Baldoni was denied access to discovery, the rights to examine critical evidence, and some are calling the judge's contrasting decisions blatant favoritism. But could this help actually be setting Lively up for something worse? The judge also noted that all the evidence Blake Lively requested had already been provided. From the outside, this sounds like her team has everything they need to press forward. Yet legal insiders have pointed out that this statement might actually be a veiled critique. If Lively already has all her evidence, then why hasn't her case gained any real traction? This odd line is leading to speculation that her claims against Wallace, and maybe even the broader lawsuit, are weaker than she's letting on. And here's where it gets murkier. While Lively may have another chance to go after Wallace, questions about her legal strategy are growing louder. Why file this claim in New York, an entirely unsuitable venue to begin with? Some skeptics think it wasn't a mistake at all, but rather a calculated gamble to drag Wallace into the media frenzy surrounding this case. If that's true, this dismissal could have the opposite effect, drawing unwanted attention to how shaky her original case looks. This decision might appear like a small procedural hiccup, but it risks becoming a massive chink in Lively's armor. Hollywood loves a courtroom drama, but there's a growing belief that these rulings are opening the door for Baldoni and his team to fight back even harder. The legal momentum seems to be working against her. And now, it's all about whether her own evidence will end up causing even bigger problems. And when you dig into how she's gathered that evidence, this small setback begins to look like the start of an even larger crisis.
Blake Lively's dropping subpoenas left and right. They seem to be getting nervous. And I actually, Dave, you were saying this too, that docket was looking like chaos. I'm curious, do you think there is, what is the reason behind this, do you guys think? Why are they suddenly dropping us? Is there any worry, you think, that there could be an abuse of the process here and that the lawyers were finally realizing, yikes, we've made a mess, we need to clean this up? Are they nervous? Jack, I'll go to you first. What are your thoughts on all these dropping subpoenas?
Here are my thoughts, Andy. We can't read too much into anything is the reality. We don't want to infer. We don't want to mentally masturbate. We don't want to speculate. We know that in this country, unfortunately, celebrity is currency. And it's the audible voices in society that tend to have the most impact, if you will. And in all fairness, with Blake and Ryan, they have a significant amount of money. They have a legitimate platform. And as a result, they're able to hire some pretty darn good lawyers who are able to spend a significant amount of time. What we've learned during the course of our representation, and again, we're honored to represent Popcorn Planet, is that there are teams of lawyers on behalf of each subpoena. So every content creator or every news outlet, every pundit who has spoken out against these folks are otherwise being subpoenaed. And to some degree, it is a campaign to squelch, to interfere with the free transmission of information and news. They're just trying to shut you up, Andy. That's the reality, man.
Well, it's interesting. You say that there's a lot of departments, it seems like, right over there. So they've got a ton of law firms, like, all factored in this. It's been a question I have. Is there a little bit of maybe they're just billing their rich clients to keep this going? What do you think?
Listen, that's the reality. The vast majority of lawyers in this particular context, in a commercial context, are billing on an hourly basis. So the sooner you have resolution, the less money you make. That's what the interesting conflict of interest is, so to speak. Not unlike a stockbroker, right? The best advice he can give you, for example, in a sideways market is don't trade. But he's thinking about, his kid needs braces, he's got to pay tuition costs, and he's going to go ahead and tell you to either sell or purchase something because he makes a commission. It's not unlike lawyers. And in this particular circumstance, we have literally a team of lawyers for each subpoena. So during the course of our negotiations, we've spoken with one particular team who has been assigned to Popcorn Planet. Part of our negotiations have also spread into the Google subpoena. It's interesting because the folks who we're discussing and negotiating with don't have the authority to speak on behalf of Google. Nah, Jack, you're going to have to call in our second team, right? The defense. Bring those guys out here. And every single one of them, Andy, is earning money per hour. There's a saying in the law, they churn the file, and they basically turn milk into butter, brother.
Blake Lively may have thought she'd uncovered a smoking gun in Stephanie Jones's private texts, but the way those messages were acquired could end up detonating her case instead. According to the Popcorn Planet host, this evidence wasn't just handed over. It was allegedly obtained through underhanded methods involving a fake subpoena and even a shell corporation. That's not just messy, it's potentially illegal. The host called the situation shady as F, my. And Hollywood insiders are starting to wonder whether Lively's team crossed a line they can't come back from. Here's the issue. Evidence like this doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just what's in the texts that matters, but how those texts were accessed in the first place. If Lively's team can't show that the messages were obtained with proper legal authorization, her whole case could be in jeopardy. More troubling, it raises serious concerns about whether privacy laws were violated. Stephanie Jones's phone isn't public property, and getting private messages through sketchy tactics could have grave consequences. It's one thing to accuse someone of wrongdoing. It's another to risk breaking the law yourself to make that accusation stick. The host went on to suggest that the texts might not even survive in court. Sure, they could seem like valuable evidence now, but if it turns out they were obtained illegally, they could be thrown out entirely. Imagine the hole that would leave in Lively's case. These texts were reportedly a key part of her lawsuit, one of the foundations her legal team was counting on to back up her claims. Take them away and what's left? Not much, and that paints a pretty bleak picture for Lively's strategy moving forward. But it doesn't stop there. The legal and ethical fallout from all this could flip the entire case on its head. If these accusations about the texts being illegally obtained are proven true, Lively might find herself facing counterclaims, and not just civil ones. The possibility of criminal charges is very real when privacy laws are involved, particularly when evidence acquisition dips into such murky waters. That could transform Lively from the aggressor in this legal battle into the one having to defend her actions, a position no Hollywood A-lister wants to be in. And let's not forget Brian Freedman, Baldoni's powerhouse attorney, who will undoubtedly seize this misstep and turn it into ammunition against Lively. Even if the evidence doesn't lead to charges, Freedman could use the controversy to destroy her credibility in court. Once you call the legitimacy of her tactics into question, the entire narrative starts to collapse. This isn't just about losing a piece of evidence, it's about forfeiting the trust and advantage needed to win. As if all that weren't enough, this isn't the only issue with Lively's evidence. There's another layer of doubt hanging over her case, something that doesn't just challenge how she got the evidence, but whether it's even believable in the first place.
Chaos, right? It's like there's so much going on in there. Do you think there's a potential abuse? A lot of people are saying it. Is there an abuse of process here? And can people who've now had their subpoenas thrown out, can they do anything? Can they file for, money back or something? What are your thoughts on it all?
Well, that's an interesting question. It looks like a messy docket. There's a lot going on. It appears to be a pretty accelerated docket as well, because we see that the judge has put deadlines on discovery, including all the third-party discovery, which you're included in. As large as this law firm is that's handling the work on behalf of Lively, they do have limited resources. There's only so much they can do. And when you start going after as many defendants as they're going after, and then as many independent third parties, including you and many others, I believe 16 other content creators, the resources start to get spread a little thin. So, like Jack said, it's hard to read too much into it. It's possible that some of these people have said, look, we simply don't have any information responsive to those requests. It's possible that they've reached agreements informally. Without really knowing that, it's really hard to say what exactly is going on there. But yeah, I can see possibly some panic setting in on their part, seeing the train coming down the tunnel here, and have to stretch those resources out as efficiently as possible. But as far as the abuse process,
it is a slow train coming, but it's coming, brother. It's coming up around the bend. And,
they don't even have our train yet. Our train's still yet to come into the station.
We've already. We can go ahead and release to your viewing audience. We've already made filings in the Middle District here in Florida. There's two ways that you can respond to subpoenas in terms of whether you're objecting, whether you're filing a motion to quash, or whether you're complying with that. And that can be done in the court which issued the subpoena. In this case, it was the Southern District of New York in Manhattan. So we can certainly respond there, or by virtue of the fact that compliance is required here in Florida, and specifically in the Middle District in Florida. Here in Florida, we have the Northern District, Southern District, and Middle District. Based upon where Popcorn Planet's studios and headquarters are, you're required to comply here in the Middle District. So we have filed our motion to quash here in the Middle District. We are continuing to supplement that motion along with additional affidavits, additional information, additional research. You said it a moment ago. Is Blake starting to get tight? It's not she's getting tight. I think the lawyers are getting a little bit concerned because they knew from Jump Street, Ange, that they were trying to thread a needle. I don't want to talk about lawyers being surreptitious or otherwise sneaky. They have filed a subpoena in allegedly good faith. When a lawyer puts his signature on a document, he is attesting to the validity of what's set forth therein. So I don't want to speak again in a disparaging fashion about Blake or about her lawyers, but they're certainly looking to thread a very, very small needle. You, as a journalist, have very specific rights and privileges which are afforded to you, not merely by the Florida Constitution, not merely by journalistic privileges under state law, but under federal law, and most importantly, by virtue of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And these folks are essentially trying to circumvent some of those protections.
Blake Lively's lawsuit heavily hinges on proving that Jed Wallace coordinated an online smear campaign against her. Her claims paint Wallace as the mastermind behind social media attacks meant to sabotage her reputation. But Wallace has strongly denied these allegations, calling his role entirely passive. According to him, he wasn't pulling the strings or orchestrating an army of digital trolls. Instead, he claims his involvement was limited to analyzing trends and observing organic sentiment online. Wallace insists that he did not publish or direct anyone to post or comment on social media about the case or the related controversies surrounding Justin Baldoni or Lively herself. Part of Lively's narrative suggests Wallace amplified negative content about her using ghost accounts or even a so-called digital army. These accusations, if proven, would have been a smoking gun for her case. However, Wallace has flat out denied those claims, stating his work primarily involved reviewing media coverage and sharing those observations privately with Nathan. Additionally, he argued that things had taken on a momentum of their own. Most people online were already siding with Baldoni without any encouragement from him. According to his timeline, the limited work he conducted concluded a long time ago, back in November 2024. This context strips away some of the intent Lively's team may have hoped to suggest. But if Wallace wasn't orchestrating a campaign, what's left of Lively's claims? This is where the judge's dismissal hits especially hard. The court granted Wallace his dismissal not on the grounds of innocence but because of jurisdictional technicalities. Being based in Texas, Wallace couldn't be held accountable under New York law for the claims Lively made against him. While this decision doesn't bar her from refiling in another venue, it does chip away at the immediacy and strength of her accusations. And there's an added sting. The judge's ruling seems to reinforce Wallace's stance that his role was minor, perhaps non-influential enough to merit the kind of sweeping campaign Lively alleged. The Popcorn Planet host didn't seem convinced by Lively's arguments either, noting that much of the backlash she faced came from her own actions, not a coordinated effort. Lively's detractors weren't silent, but were they puppets controlled by Wallace? For now, the evidence to back that claim looks tenuous at best. The host even suggested Lively might have overestimated her own public image, assuming any critique had to be orchestrated rather than natural. These attitudes give credibility to Wallace's defense, which frames him as an observer analyzing pre-existing trends, not a manipulator creating them. If Wallace's alleged role falls apart for good, it could be devastating for Lively. Her case depends on painting a picture of systematic attacks, not just scattered criticism or poor public sentiment. Without Wallace as the supposed mastermind, her narrative begins to feel disjointed, and the weight falls back on her team to find another villain. But as cracks in her claims widen, her own aggressive legal tactics are drawing the most heat, and the next legal bombshell lies in her subpoenas.
Andy, contrary to what public perception might be, and again, it's better that you and our viewing audience hears it from me rather than somebody else. Unfortunately, there are limitations to the legal process. I'm a true believer. Dave and I believe truly in the jury trial system. I was scheduled to pick a jury first thing this morning in a week-long trial, and unfortunately we were continued, and that's what happened. So I do believe in the system. But at the end of the day, you'll find that the trials and subpoenas and the litigation process, it's more about proof rather than the truth. So we like to maintain these noble notions of we're on a truth-finding mission here. No, we're not. Right? We have certain laws in this country like the exclusionary rule. So if we want the truth, we find a knife. And the knife was used by some pedophile scumbag to cut up and rape a girl. It's got his DNA, her DNA all over it. But wait a minute, there was a defect in the warrant. So we're not so concerned about the truth. Rather, we have to suppress that evidence. The jury never gets to hear about it. Well, it would certainly be helpful in determining what the truth was, but they can't admit it by virtue of the fact that we're so concerned about constitutional principles. In this particular case, you have to keep in mind what it is Blake Lively is trying to do to you and the other content creators. This isn't a true truth-finding or information discovery process. They're not issuing these subpoenas because they want information. They're issuing these subpoenas essentially to scare Popcorn Planet and the other individuals who are providing, by virtue of the rights given to us by the First Amendment, disseminating information about what's going on in this case. So the purpose of all of these subpoenas, the purpose of all this lawfare is essentially to scare you. And again, you haven't backed down. So again, to best answer your question, why are some of these subpoenas being dropped? Because people like Popcorn Planet are standing up. And again, the effort to otherwise squelch you will not be successful.
No, well said. And a lot of people have been stepping up as they pulled these subpoenas out, and shout out to them. Because I can't imagine that Blake's team's going to want this stuff on the docket for the judge or anybody to read, filled with all this hey, judge, did you know that, reminding the judge of all the nefarious seeming things that she's done or bad things. It's not a good look, is it, Dave?
No, it certainly isn't. And, I can tell you, as it pertains to what Jack just said, the purpose of these subpoenas being really to bully these content creators into squelching their comments on this case. I think that you need to look no further than the fact that they're asking you for communications with the defendants, but they haven't asked the defendants for those communications. They're asking you for them. I mean, if they really wanted to get the information, like Jack said, if it was about information, they would go to the parties of the suit.
Talk about Rule 45, Dave. Tell Popcorn Planet and the audience about Rule 45.
Rule 45 under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure states that if you're going to issue a subpoena to a non-party, you have to first satisfy certain burdens. And one of those is that you have to try to obtain the information that you're requesting from actual parties to the case before you go burdening a non-party who's not part of the case with expense, time, and whatnot that's required to respond to these things. Additionally, Rule 45 precludes discovery of information that would be considered privileged, which this information that they're requesting is. It's covered by 3 distinct privileges. There's a statutory privilege in Florida called the Shield Law. There's a First Amendment privilege, and there's a common law privilege. All of those shroud the information that they're requesting from you from disclosure, unless they meet certain standards, which, in our view, they cannot meet.
Yeah, you're going to see once we're actually able to file our most recently amended motion to quash. We're including some of the historical import of the First Amendment, and
it's pretty good,
Dave
guys.
Was able to, yeah, listen to me, Ange. Dave was able to find some tremendous historical information, not merely about the Constitution and the First Amendment, but about Benjamin Franklin and his brother.
Blake Lively's choice to subpoena content creators has lit a firestorm that's quickly spiraling out of her control. What may have been intended as a strong-arm legal strategy is instead being labeled by many as a blatant intimidation tactic. These subpoenas weren't aimed at powerful corporations or central players in her case. They targeted smaller creators, people who simply posted about the legal drama online. It's a move that feels less like justice and more like bullying, and that's exactly how the industry and the public are starting to see it. The backlash has been sharp and loud, with outlets like Emily Baker and Molly openly criticizing the approach and warning that it might blow up in Lively's face. The Popcorn Planet host cut straight to the point, calling the subpoenas a terrible look, and predicting that this tactic would absolutely backfire. And here's why. Rather than focusing her energy on the major claims of her lawsuit, Lively is alienating public opinion with moves that feel unnecessarily aggressive. These subpoenas seem designed less to gather information for her case and more to control the narrative around it, silencing voices that didn't align with her perspective. Hollywood insiders are now raising the question: why target YouTube hosts and online commentators instead of sticking to the core legal battle? If the aim was to strengthen her case, this strategy is doing exactly the opposite, and the industry's disapproval is starting to show. James Brolin, an actor well respected among Hollywood elites, has publicly sided with Justin Baldoni, voicing his support amid Lively's escalating legal maneuvers. Brolin's statement isn't just one person expressing a personal preference. It's a sign that Lively's actions are rubbing many in the entertainment world the wrong way. The more this backlash grows, the more Lively risks turning herself into her own worst enemy, with the damage potentially extending beyond this case and into her broader career. What's making this even worse is how these subpoenas are being framed. Instead of being viewed as a legitimate legal necessity, they're coming off as a desperate, or worse, vindictive attempt to silence dissent. In an industry where reputation is currency, Lively is gambling with her public persona in a way that's leaving many observers baffled. The more these actions are scrutinized, the clearer it becomes that they've shifted attention away from her legal claims onto her own questionable tactics. Public opinion doesn't seem to be swinging her way, and the longer this drags on, the lonelier her fight could become. But this isn't just about her Hollywood standing. These subpoenas raise bigger questions about her intentions and credibility. When you pair them with claims that her evidence gathering has been unethical, a picture begins to form. One where Lively might be fighting as much to protect herself as to win this lawsuit. And it doesn't stop there. Somewhere in the background of this chaos, another explosive claim is brewing. It involves none other than the New York Times, and it might shine an even brighter light on how Lively's case is being handled in and out of court. Blake Lively's case took another controversial turn, with claims that she may have used the media to gain an advantage before Justin Baldoni even had a chance to react. The Popcorn Planet host alleges that Lively, or her team, gave information to the New York Times early, allowing her to frame the story on her terms. Baldoni, on the other hand, reportedly wasn't given enough time to respond before the piece went live. This seemingly deliberate timing created a one-sided narrative favoring Lively right out of the gate. And in a case this high-profile, public perception can be as damaging as the courtroom itself. By setting the tone in her favor, Lively ensured that when the article dropped, many would already have her version of events as the first and dominant impression. And the timing here is critical. Legal cases involving celebrities often unfold as much in the public arena as they do in the courtroom. The host pointed out that this lack of time for Baldoni to present his side wasn't just unfair, it teetered on the edge of being opportunistic. The implication is clear. If the public already sees her as the wronged party, it might be harder for Baldoni to recover both reputationally and legally. But this tactic, while effective for controlling headlines, hasn't come without scrutiny. The ethical implications of leaking details to the media, especially in an ongoing legal battle, are significant. For starters, it calls into question the fairness of the process. Was justice really the priority here? Or was the goal to put Baldoni on the defensive as quickly as possible? These concerns aren't new in celebrity lawsuits, but they certainly add a layer of doubt to Lively's actions. The Popcorn Planet host didn't mince words, calling it a dirty move, and even suggesting that media outlets like the New York Times were complicit in sensationalizing the story for clicks and views. This isn't the only instance where Lively's name has come up in connection with questionable media leaks. TMZ, too, reportedly had inside information about subpoenas before Baldoni himself, something the host labeled crazy. Patterns like this suggest a broader effort to weaponize the media, selectively sharing information to create pressure and chaos. At best, this raises transparency issues. At worst, it paints a picture of manipulation by Lively's team to win the battle of public opinion. And the backlash isn't just coming from commentators like Popcorn Planet. Media personalities like Emily Baker and Molly have begun to criticize Lively's tactics openly, signaling a shift away from the sympathetic coverage she initially received. The broader shift in perception could spell trouble, as her very credibility begins slipping through her fingers. The narrative she worked so hard to build might now be unraveling in full view. Ultimately, Lively's apparent media strategy achieves one thing: more questions about her integrity. Could this reliance on leaks to plant her side of the story be the misstep that finally turns the tide against her? It's already adding more layers of doubt to a case that's struggling to hold its weight. But as these pieces keep falling into place, the bigger question is whether this gamble will cost her more than just a legal victory. The cracks in Blake Lively's case are becoming impossible to ignore. From the judge's dismissal of Jed Wallace to the growing backlash against her aggressive subpoenas, the narrative she's crafted is unraveling. Even worse, accusations of manipulating the New York Times have raised serious questions about her integrity. Could her own tactics be the fatal flaw in her lawsuit? As Hollywood turns against her and legal obstacles stack up, it's hard to see how Lively recovers from this. But this story is far from over. Stay tuned. This dramatic legal battle still has plenty of surprises waiting to unfold.